In 1992, a fighting game was released that not only revolutionized the industry, but also turned it on its head. No, I'm not talking about Ultimate Gay Fighter, I'm talking about Mortal Kombat. What's the connection between this game and Jean-Claude Van Damme? What was Johnny Cage actor Daniel Bazina's dispute with Midway Studios? So get over here! We are going to discuss the history of Mortal Kombat. The year is 1991 and Street Fighter II is sweeping the nation with its unique style of gameplay. Midway was taking notice of not only the huge popularity, but also the huge dollar signs. They ordered their team to create a combat fighting game within a year. The original concept came from Ed Boon and John Tobias. The game takes inspiration from Chinese mythology as well as Enter the Dragon, Bloodsport, and a little bit of Big Trouble in Little China. The original design team consisted of only 4 people. Ed Boon was a programmer, along with artists John Tobias, John Vogel, and Mr. Toasty himself, Dan Forden, as sound designer. They wanted to do something different from Street Fighter, so they experimented with digitized characters as opposed to pixel art. They wanted something with a harder edge which would appeal to the male demographic. They felt that the digitized characters would represent realistic violence, and the addition of blood was just a cherry on top. It didn't take long for them to have a demo up and running of a character doing an uppercut to another character. After seeing it play for the first time, they knew they were onto something special. Mortal Kombat sees 7 martial artists join a secret tournament where the freedom of their realm is at stake. The 7 participants are Sub-Zero, Scorpion, Raiden, Liu Kang, Kano, Johnny Cage, and Sonya. Instead of the 6-button control scheme found in Street Fighter, it uses a 5-button layout in an X pattern. You have a high punch, low punch, high kick, low kick, and a block button right in the middle. Another gameplay element that has become crucial to the series is the juggling. If you are a skilled enough player, you could pummel your opponent while they are helpless in midair. This was discovered by accident early on in the testing, but after seeing the positive response from fans, it was expanded upon. The Fatalities originally started out as a counter to the dizzy effect found in Street Fighter II. Ed Boon liked the concept of a free hit, but hated that it occurred in the middle of the match, so they decided to put it at the end. The original idea was for Fatalities to only be used against Shang Tsung. They decided to let you do it to your opponent instead, and everybody loved it. The higher-ups at Midway never expected anyone to discover the Fatalities. Since the game was released before the internet was mainstream, secrets of the game spread through playgrounds, to arcades, to magazines. Clearly, one of the main selling points that attracted the male demographic was all of the blood and gore. Thankfully, there was a solid game engine underneath that kept the players playing long after the shock value wore off. After defeating all the other fighters in the game, you have to fight a few 2-on-1 matches. If you can make it through these in one piece, you get to fight the sub-boss Goro. Goro is ridiculously overpowered, and certain moves you attempt to pull off will not work on him. Once you find his pattern though, it's a bit easy to take him out. Goro was actually a stop-motion model designed by Kurt Chiarelli. The Grand Master of the tournament and also the big nasty of the game is Shang Tsung. Originally known as Shang Lao, he has the ability to morph into any fighter at will. Even with this ability, he is not as difficult as Goro. Once you defeat him, you will get a personalized ending depending on the fighter that you picked. The Fatalities were not the only secret in the game. Every 6th match on the pit stage, you will notice silhouettes flying in front of the moon. If you can defeat your opponent twice without taking any damage and perform a fatality, all without using the block button, you get the chance to fight Reptile. He was initially conceived as a cooler version of Scorpion, but was not made a playable character until Mortal Kombat 2. On the bottom of the pit stage, if you look closely, you can see the heads of Ed Boon and John Tobias impaled on the spikes. Contrary to popular belief, this was not the first gory one-on-one fighting game. That distinction would have to go to Palace Software's Barbarian, the Ultimate Warrior. I had this game on my Amiga and was pretty shocked when I saw the head decapitation move for the first time. It also had another distinction of having one fine honey on the cover. Hubba hubba. After every 3rd battle, the Test Your Might minigame occurs. This consists of your player standing above one of 5 blocks of increasing difficulty. You have to hammer multiple buttons until the gauge next to your character reaches a certain point. You then have to press the block button to strike. You start off on wood, then move up to stone, steel, ruby, and diamond. The game started out as a vehicle for Hollywood actor Jean-Claude Van Damme. They were trying to get the license for the movie Bloodsport and wanted Van Damme to star in the game. A deal could not be reached, but instead they paid tribute to the action star in the form of Johnny Cage. Jean-Claude and Johnny Cage both have the same initials. You can even do the dreaded nut punch of doom, similar to what Van Damme did in the movie Bloodsport. As previously stated, the game was inspired by the movie Big Trouble in Little China. The character of Raiden is a direct ripoff of the character Lightning, right down to the type of hat that he wears. In 1992, Democratic Senators Joe Lieberman and Herb Kohl led hearings on video game violence. Two specific games were cited in the hearings. The first one was Night Trap, which featured 90 minutes of full motion video with scenes that were considered sexually suggestive and exploitive. The other game was Mortal Kombat, with its realistic digitized sprites, blood, and the ability to use fatality moves to defeat your opponent. This led to the formation of a self-regulated ratings board called the Entertainment Software Rating Board, or the ESRB. Now, I don't know about you, but after I played a few rounds of Mortal Kombat back in the early 90s, I always felt like ripping somebody's spine out, or at the very least, ripping their heart out and holding it above their head. Johnny Cage actor Daniel Pazina was involved in a lawsuit with Midway Games. He was paid $50 per hour, which does seem a bit low, with the promise that they would take care of him if the game was a big success. Of course, the game was an enormous success and sold over 1,000 arcade units. Where things take a turn for the worst is when you consider all of the home ports were released and the actors did not receive any sort of royalties. He received a mild pay increase for Mortal Kombat 2, but again, no royalties on the home releases. He ended up filing suit against Midway Games for unauthorized use of his image, but the case was thrown out. He did appear in full Johnny Cage attire promoting the competing arcade game Bloodstorm, which ended up paying him his entire Mortal Kombat 1 salary for only 45 minutes of work. To say Mortal Kombat was a phenomenon would be a huge understatement. There was no other fighting game in terms of popularity except for maybe Street Fighter II. Midway was quick to cash in with a plethora of licenses. There were comic books, toys, and cartoons. Acclaim snatched up the home console ports and set aside September 13th, 1993 as the release date. It was dubbed Mortal Monday and led to a classic TV commercial. Let's get this party started with the Super Nintendo version. Developed by Sculpture Software, this version certainly looks the part. Nice, large, detailed sprites and excellent sound. The problem comes from the controls. The same combos from the arcade no longer work. You also cannot counter air attacks. The biggest sin of them all is the lack of blood. At the time, Nintendo was a family-friendly console, which meant that extreme violence or any kind of blood were forbidden. Instead of the buckets of blood that were spilled in the arcade game, we get loads and loads of lovely sweat. I haven't seen this much sweat since I was constipated. And what about the fatalities, you ask? Well, first of all, they had to be changed to finishing moves and not be called fatalities. A few of them have been left unaltered, but Kano's big fatality, finishing move, is he reaches into your chest and pulls out nothing. You can't get much more anticlimactic than that. Nintendo finally got the message when the sales figures for this game came in, and when Mortal Kombat 2 came out the following year, it was complete and uncensored. As far as Mortal Kombat 1, from the bottom of my heart, Nintendo, this is for you. The Sega Master System is up next. Since Sega was catering to the older male demographic, they decided to let the blood flow on their version of Mortal Kombat. While the graphics look very good for an 8-bit machine, the animation is atrocious. Also, there were only 2 stages available, and the game is missing Kano. The controls are pretty slippery as well. If you thought the animation was bad in the Master System version, then check out the Game Boy. The animation is so slow, I thought I was watching a video that was buffering. In this version, again, we only have 2 stages, but instead of missing Kano, we're missing Johnny Cage. The audio made me want to stab my eardrums with a screwdriver. The controls are even worse than the Master System version. On the plus side, though, there is a cheat that lets you play as Goro, the only home version this is available in. The Sega Genesis version is up next. This was developed by Probe Software, and it really shows. Thanks to a blood code, this game was uncensored. The problem lies with the sound and graphics. It's missing a lot of the voice samples, and the graphics are very grainy compared to the Super Nintendo. What it lacks in audio and visuals, it more than makes up in the gameplay. You can get by with a standard 3-button controller, but it's best to pick up the 6-button pad. The Game Gear version looks very similar to the Master System, only with a zoomed-in effect. The game plays almost identical to its big brother. The Amiga version plays pretty good with only 1 button. Despite this being a port of the Genesis version, the graphics look a bit cleaner in this one. Nice speed and animation, plus better sound and music makes this a very good conversion. The MS-DOS port is probably the best in my opinion. This was ported over using the source code from the arcade game, so this is as close as you're going to get. In terms of graphics, animation, sound effects, and playability, this is essentially the arcade game. The music is not quite as good as the Sega CD version, but everything else is top shelf. The Sega CD version is last, but it's very well done. Featuring better animation, slightly better graphics, and perfect audio makes this the best console port out there. The only downside is the reduced color palette and the loading times. They said it couldn't be done. They said it wouldn't be possible, but in 1995 we finally got a good video game movie adaptation. After seeing the lackluster success of movies such as Super Mario Bros. And Street Fighter II, Mortal Kombat was released into theaters. Following the storyline from the video game, the movie features all of the characters from the original arcade game. The movie features a lot of action, but the problem is, New Line Cinema wanted a PG-13 rating, so most of the blood and almost all of the fatalities are not present. Still though, it's a good little action flick and leaps and bounds above the previous video game adaptation. They also released a sequel titled Mortal Kombat Annihilation, which was absolutely stinky. Since the game's inception, there have been countless sequels and spin-offs with no signs of slowing down anytime soon. The game was a cultural phenomenon, and it helped establish the rating system that we use today for games. With over 1,000 arcade cabinets manufactured, I'm sure you'll run across one at some point, so give it a go if you haven't already. If you like my videos, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Give me a thumbs up and also subscribe to my channel. It's the only way it can grow. Thanks for watching.